Welcome to the 23rd episode of Inside the CFO Office. We have with us today Venkatraman G S, also as we call him Venky. Venky is a CFO at MathCo, a global enterprise AI and analytics company. He comes with an extensive finance leadership experience across multiple large and mid-sized firms like Wipro, Accenture, Mindtree, Subex, and Maveric Systems. We'll be speaking on the topic of working with the C-suite, a CFO playbook. How has been your journey as a finance leader?
In each of these companies, be it these large MNCs or large Indian multinationals or the smaller ones, I think there is always opportunity to learn, gain new insights. I've had the good fortune of managing and leading large teams across these organizations.
You have worked across the Wipros and the bigger large enterprises of the world. You have worked with Maveric Systems kind of companies. You have worked with Subex, you have worked with Accenture, then you worked in MathCo.
MathCo is in the data science, data analytics, AI related space. It's a fairly young team and extremely focused on growth and growing rapidly. Maverick, a single vertical focused company, they work only with banks and financial services. Subex was another very interesting learning because that's one of those few product companies I worked for. Mindtree, I used to be the controller, what kind of systems, checks and balances and processes you need to have to sign off on financials for a listed company was another great experience. So I ran the business finance function. I was the chief risk officer, then the controller.
Brilliant journey. You focus on multiple industries, multiple companies. Maverick is very focused. MathCo is a bit more expanded. The kind of customers that you have worked with, the challenges has been immense. You have worked with listed companies, you have worked with VC-driven companies, you have worked with private equity-driven companies, and you've driven different functions. I'm wondering why are you not called versatile Venky? How has been your experience with C-suite? What is the CFO's playbook?
I think two or three things you need to be very clear in terms of understand what is required. So I think being patient and focused to listen to what is being asked for and then responding is something which I see the CXO folks really appreciate. As you respond, you also need to be very sharp and focused and precise. If you go with problems, it is expected. So do go in potential solutions.
What is your opinion on AI disrupting the CFO tech landscape?
There are many areas where the disruption could happen. The question is how
Right.
soon or how quickly financial reporting is ideal from an AI perspective because there is a lot of intelligence to be applied. Related area is FP&A. Companies spend a lot of time today. Finance teams churn out a number of reports, send out those reports on a monthly basis, or there are dashboards available. Once these AI solutions are rolled out, you just have to go and click and say, this is a dashboard, invoice automation or AP invoice matching or processing or some collection forecasting or collection follow-up.
The entire invoice automation, collection side, or communications. I agree. There's a lot of things that AI agent could do. Pieces of advice for finance professionals.
To be curious and to be curious about technology, you still have to do the routine and the quote unquote boring things properly regularly. You have to be able to delegate a lot of the work with responsibility. But if you don't delegate, you're not going to take on larger roles.
It was great to have you with us.
Thank you.
sharing
Thank you,
your
Mother.
journey.
Thank you. Wonderful talking to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Amartya Singh, the co-founder and CEO of Inflow, an AI native product focused on invoice to cash and credit decisions and scoring. Welcome to the 23rd episode of Inside the CFO Office, where we explore the journeys of finance leaders, discuss the challenges they have overcome, and gain insights into the future of finance. We have with us today Venkatraman G S, also as we call him Venky. Venky is a CFO at MathCo, a global enterprise AI and analytics company. He comes with an extensive finance leadership experience across multiple large and mid-sized firms like Wipro, Accenture, Mindtree, Subex, and Maverick Systems. He's worked very closely with the C-suite at multiple firms and has led the setup and growth of multiple critical finance functions and teams. So today we'll be speaking on the topic of working with the C-suite, a CFO playbook. Welcome,
Thank you.
Venky.
Thank you, Amartya. I think happy to be part of your session. And I think that you have a podcast talking to CFOs is a very interesting idea. So happy to be part of the session.
Thanks, Venky. And let's dig into the podcast. Let's start off with the first question. Your experience has been really interesting. You've grown through the entire finance leadership journey from step by step, from company to company. You've seen companies of different shapes and sizes. So we'd love to know how has been your journey as a finance leader.
Yeah, so I think, as you rightly said, I think I've worked for all shapes and size of organizations, right from MNCs to Indian MNCs, the foreign MNCs, and the startups, as you would call it, as well, or the ones which are emerging and growing. I've been with part of companies which have grown rapidly, like the Mindtree example. I think I've seen the company grow from 100 million to $1 billion. So you've also seen rapid growth companies. How do they manage? So I think in each of these companies, be it these large MNCs or large Indian multinationals, or the smaller ones, I think there is always opportunity to learn and opportunity to gain new insights every time you work in such companies, at least. And of course, I think I've had the good fortune of managing and leading large teams across these organizations, and the team composition has also been very interesting. I think they're fairly many of them had very young team members and some with very diverse backgrounds as well, so it helps get different perspectives when you manage teams like this. Also, in a way, I think also time helps you fine tune your style of leadership, right? I think what I've seen work over the years, working with different finance teams over the years, is many times we all hesitate to give larger responsibilities to younger people or people who are not maybe 100% ready, right? I think we always want to look for people who are absolutely ready or more than ready, and that's when you want to give them larger responsibility, because you want to be sure nothing goes wrong, everything is working fine, and you don't want to take those risks. But what has worked for me, I think, is absolutely the opposite. What I've seen work well is giving opportunities and responsibilities to people early. Even if people are, let's say, 75-80% ready, I think it's worthwhile taking those chances, because what I've seen is the moment you give such larger responsibilities to people, invariably these people step up and do a fantastic job of what they're required to do. And I've seen that across genders, more so with younger women and ladies, because I think they even more respond, even better, I would say, respond to some of these opportunities. So I think that's something which I've seen work well. And I think that's what I encourage my own team members to do even now today, to say that, plus keep trying, that unless you try, you'll not know. And there's no, you're not necessarily going to get a clone of yourself, right? Many times you also try to look for yourself for a as best a clone as yourself, for you to think that's the person who's going to be effective and successful. Whereas when you give opportunities to another thing which has worked well for me as well is in terms of delegating, and delegating with responsibility. I think I always find that sometimes you want to be working very closely or giving them minute micro instructions to your teams to say that do this way it'll work, versus telling people this is what you want and tell them this is the outcome I'm looking for, and then just giving them the space to do what they're required to do. Of course, it's not
Got it.
just delegating, abdicating your responsibility, but more delegating and being responsible about taking those point checks or doing those point reviews at the right time to see whether it's headed in the right direction, but still provide the space and the opportunity for people to do what they're required to do. I think both of these things, if you do well, it allows you to take on different and larger responsibilities and up your bandwidth to be more effective in more, let's say, more strategic or more other opportunities which you would want to be contributing on.
Got it. No, great. I think there are a couple of points that you mentioned. One is obviously for every skill set, there are these kind of people who really fit into that kind of a role. But I think I like your point about giving the opportunity to others as well. I mean, where there you see talent, caliber, you see the potential and the determination. They're 70-75% there in terms of the requirement skill set. And but there is a lot of fresh ideas and thoughts also they get into that role. So that allows that, and that also combines with the other aspect of delegation. So when you are delegating, when you are asking them that hey, this is the outcome that you need to achieve, how they need to achieve, they can use their innovation, their own thought process. Processes are always there in companies. You work out your innovation and you reach the goal. Love your answer, I think, and I'm sure that you have applied this throughout your career. So let's move to the next question. We'd love to know your work for some really brilliant and huge companies. You have worked across the Wipros and the bigger large enterprises of the world. You have worked excuse me. You have worked with Maveric Systems kind of companies. You have worked with Subex. You have worked with Accenture. Then you worked in MathCo. So you have worked across different companies. So how has been your experience working at these brilliant
Yeah, so I
companies?
think maybe I'll start with the most recent one now, and then maybe go back in to the ones prior to what I've worked. So MathCo, I think, is extremely interesting in the sense that it is in a space which is really hot and happening today, right? They're in the data science, data analytics, AI related space, which is absolutely one of the most focus within the tech services space, if you would call it that, right? I think so much of demand and need for such services, and large enterprise in the world you would look at would want some data science, data analytics work to be done for their needs. And now with AI coming in, how do you embed AI and how do you use agentic AI solutions to be able to provide services to these customers? So I think the fact that I'm working for a company like this, it is very exciting. And equally, it's a young company, it's a 10-year-old company, and they've pretty much started from scratch to where they are today. And they've grown and grown rapidly. And the whole team, what I see, unlike some of the other companies I've worked in the past, it's a fairly young team, including the promoters, the next level leadership. It's a fairly young team and extremely focused on growth and growing rapidly and acquiring some really marquee custom names already and continue to acquire a lot more of them. When you're part of a system like that, the energy and the enthusiasm you see rubs on you as well to say that, okay, how do we also be part of this setup and contribute and support that growth? The fact that the company's got a private equity investor already tells you that there is validation and there is external validation of what they're doing and what they're doing well. And of course, I'm now working with the promoters and the management to see how do we take it to the next level. What are the newer areas we can grow, and what are the inorganic opportunities the company can look at? What is the next round of fundraise if you need to do? And all of those aspects is what I'm now working on. It's been a wonderful journey, and I'm also learning this because while I've been part of many other IT services companies where data analytics or data science or BIDW, what it used to be called earlier, were practices as one of the practices for those companies, versus here the company focus only on this is something which is interesting and a great learning. And speaking of the other companies I've been part of, I think just prior to MathCo, I was with Maveric Systems. Maverick is another interesting specialization play in a way. It is a single vertical focused company. They work only with banks and financial services. I think in a world where companies always want to have the breadth play, right? They want to be present in multiple verticals, multiple subsections, sub areas, segments. The company has chosen to be a single vertical play, which again is a strategic choice. Of course, any strategy you make or pick has got its pros and cons, but I think when you want to be a depth player, when you say I'm focused in a vertical and I bring expertise, I understand the domain, I can speak the domain, it brings a lot of credibility in that space. And the fact that Maverick has been around for 25 years and been exclusively focused on banking financial services is another example of how specialization can also bring value. That's something which I found interesting. And of course, they work with a lot of these large global banks, and many of these banking relationships have been with them. They've been with them for 10 years, 15 years, and they've been growing those relationships fairly well. And also, I think Big is also an example where they started off as being an independent testing service provider for these banks and financial institutions. From there down, they have diversified. So for a company which used to do 100% of their business as an independent testing service provider, now they have less than 50% of their revenues coming from testing. Now they provide other services, analytics or their digital services, digital transformation offerings, and data engineering and data optimization kind of work. Other additional been able to offer to their customers to the extent that they've been able to diversify their revenues from less than more than 100% to
Right.
less than 50%. So I think interesting understanding of how this works and what are the kind of things which has worked for them in this space is something which I found very interesting. And maybe just one other company prior to that, which was Subex, was another very interesting learning for me because that's one of those few product companies I've worked for. I think otherwise all my experiences have been with services companies. Subex is one of those few India based or India originated software product companies, one of the early software product companies. I think they've been around for a while. And I think there's one of those few companies who chose to go the product route rather than take the services route, which has been popular in India. And they built a fairly good reputation around it. I think they obviously are in a very niche space because they have a product which is used by telecom service providers. So they have a fraud management and a revenue assurance solution, which is typically used by all the large telecom service providers. And it's a very sticky solution because the moment somebody buys a fraud management or revenue assurance solution, very rarely those companies switch and go to another provider. So it provides some very high degree of stickiness of revenue. Just that I think, given the nature of the space, it is not a very large, big ticket kind of deal. You'll win a deal, it will be with you, you'll continue to get recurring revenue. but just that you need to keep expanding your base of customers. So that's something which was interesting. And the fact that it was a listed company was a big experience for me. That's one of I that was the first time I became a CFO of a company, and that was a listed company itself. Although the Mindtree, I used to
Right.
be the controller, and it was a listed company as well. But when you're signing off on the financials, the responsibilities you take on is even higher. So, in terms of what kind of systems, checks and balances, and processes you need to have in place to be able to sign off on financials for a listed company was another great experience for me. I think so. Yeah, so I think in each of these companies, it's been a great learning. And Mindtree, I would prefer to touch upon briefly. It was one of the longest stints I've ever had in my working career. I think I worked for almost 13, 14 years there in multiple roles. I've seen the company grow from 100 to $1 billion. I've seen their listing getting
Right.
listed and grow rapidly. I also played multiple roles. I ran the business finance function. I was the first chief risk officer, then the controller. When you are part of a growing journey of a company, you also get to play different roles, and then you also learn and grow.
Brilliant journey, I must say, across the different organizations. You've worked in companies like which are more services driven. Then you've worked on product driven companies. Then you've worked on companies which are verticalized. For example, companies of the likes of Mindtree
Yeah,
are diverse, right? So they focus on multiple industries, multiple companies. The ICP, or ideal customer
yeah,
profile, is huge. And then obviously you mentioned about Maverick, for example, which is very focused. And MathCo again is a little bit more
yeah.
expanded. They're not
It's a
verticalized
service, a
as
single
a
service.
solution. So
Hmm.
I'm sure
Hmm.
it's a single service. So I think so. If you see the kind of customers that you have worked with, the challenges has been immense. You have worked with listed companies, you have worked with VC driven companies, you have worked with private equity driven companies, and you've driven different level of functions. And I'm wondering why are you not called versatile Venky?
That's nice of you to say that. Yeah. Hmm.
Brilliant. I think 30 minutes is very less of a time for us to cover the experience that you have, but very interesting. And thanks for sharing the journey. And really, thanks to share that entire aspect of working with a young team. That itself is a big deal because we know what you're getting on the table because there is a young team, and you mentioned that you're really growth driven. You get the maturity on the table, you get the balance on the table. That hey, we need to be aggressive in our growth, and we need to balance it with what we are doing in terms of processes, in terms of the cash flows that we have, what we are planning to do for the future, handling the private equity investors. So I really see the value that you get onto table. But I think I'll move to the next question as related to what you mentioned, right? I'm sure that you mentioned in some ways or other that you worked with the leadership team, right? And on all these three, four companies and across your journey, there are different sets of companies, right? Different sets of C-suite leaders that you
Yeah.
have worked with, right? At some cases, you are a controller. For example, you were speaking about Mindtree, right? And Mindtree, you have moved up the radar ladder in terms of working. You must have worked with the CFO, then you must have worked directly with the leadership team, and then as you move to Subex, you must be working
Yeah.
with the board, and then as you move to Maverick and MathCo, you have worked with the board, you have worked with the investors, you have worked with the leaders. So there are multiple journey points that you've had. So my question to you is that would love to know how has been your experience with C-suite, and this is the topic of our today's podcast. What is the CFO's playbook? Maybe we can break it down. What are the two, three things that you keep it in your mind when you're approaching it? And then maybe a couple of challenges. Would love to know what are the two biggest challenges. If it's not confidential, if you could share, it would be really good for our viewers.
Yeah, I think my interactions with the C-suite has been from my Mindtree days because I think um, even though I think, as you rightly said, I grew and took on multiple roles, but there's always been requirements even when I was in the business finance role, working closely with the CEO, with the chairman of the company and stuff like that. And then, of course, as I took on larger roles, it also involved working with the audit committee and the board as well. I think what I've seen over the years, Amartya, in terms of working with the C-suite is, I think two or three things you need to be very clear in terms of when you work with shoot or the leadership level or the CXO level folks or even the board for that matter is a clarity in terms of what understand what is being what is required, I think, or what are the kind of questions which are being asked of you. So I think that is something very important because sometimes, because many of these people are very senior, you're always anxious to be able to respond and provide them an answer to whatever questions or are they looking for. But I think it's important to be patient to understand what is the perspective or what is the angle from which they're coming from, not necessarily half hear it and half starting to respond, because many times in our eagerness to be able to respond to a situation, we are not necessarily processing or listening to all things which are being said. So I think being patient and focused to listen to what is being asked for and then responding is something which I see the CXO folks really appreciate and want from people, because a their attention span is limited, the time they have is also limited. So therefore, if you are not necessarily understanding what they're asking, then you're going to go all over the place, and then there is going to be a little bit of frustration in terms of how they see your response. So
Right.
being focused, and then equally as you respond, you also need to be very sharp and focused and precise in your responses, because you can't be all over the place, because you need to find ways of communicating crisp and straight. Sometimes, as finance professionals, I think sometimes you think volume is better than a sharper or a minimalistic response. I think what I've seen valued is more about being very sharp, very focused, and crisp with your responses, and that's what they look for. And then I think the equally important thing which I've seen over the years is, I think many times when you have conversations at this level, you're obviously going to them with, apart from the providing updates, and let's say you're presenting your financial statements or providing an update on how the company performed over a quarter or over the year, you're also going to be discussing some issues, challenges with them, in terms of issues or challenges which you have and which you want an opinion from the board or the audit committee or the CEO for that matter. You want an opinion, you want a view from them. And obviously, many of these are not simple problems. They will be complex, and it may not have an easy answer. Equally, what is expected is when you're going in and providing an update or listing out a particular issue or a problem, there's a clear expectation that while you do that, you're also expected to provide your point of view of how do you see that problem getting solved. So they're not necessarily interested in listening to
Right.
your problems. They're interested in listening. What are your potential solutions you have on the table? So you could have one or two
Right.
options, or you could have maybe more than two options. And that's when the board or the leadership team is going to weigh in and say, these options, among the three, this is the best. Or among the two, I think this could be a better option. Or maybe a variant to that is what you'll end up, rather than going just with problems and expecting them to give you solutions. So I think invariably, I've
Right.
seen if you go with problems without any potential options, that those meetings will not go well. Invariably, those meetings don't do well. And that's why it is expected at these levels, when you are interacting with the CXOs, do go in with your point of view and what is potential solutions. It's not necessary that whatever you're recommending as a solution may get accepted. Maybe a variant of that will get accepted,
Right.
or sometimes something completely different might get accepted. But the fact that you have a point of view and you're recommending something is what is more important. I think so. That's a very critical element when you're interacting with the CXOs, which you need to be prepared. And also, many times, even when there is a simple update, when you're providing an update, let's say it's a board meeting, end of a quarter or a half year, there is always going to be one or two additional questions the board or the audit committee members are going to ask you, either about historical financial information, or how do you see the next year going to look like, or what is happening with the planning for the next year. Something which you may not necessarily be part of the agenda for that meeting, but how do you anticipate and be prepared with those is what differentiates you with other people, other, let's say, other CFOs or other finance leaders whom they work with. I think so. That's another thing. Your ability to anticipate and be ready with those questions ahead of time is definitely something the board members or committee members really appreciate. And of course, I think
Got it.
it's also about how you understand the business. I think much as a CFO, you're required to know your numbers, your financials, and how this company performing. Equally, the expectation is how well you understand the business and how are you supporting the business strategically. Are you able to add value to the business
Right.
from a strategy perspective? Do you understand the business as well as the business leaders do, so that you are able to appreciate why certain things are happening the way it is happening, and not necessarily looking at it only from a number or a finance perspective?
Got it. No, I loved your answers because when you are speaking about working with the CFO suit, these are all learnings. For example, because you mentioned that there are multiple things you mentioned. One thing you mentioned is that it's very important to listen to the C-suite leaders because it's very diverse. They have their own priorities are diverse. The ways they approach is diverse. The thought process is diverse. For example, a sales leader will always want growth at the best. I mean, in the best possible growth. But obviously, growth can't be really unhindered. It has to have a lot of controls, risk controls, and other controls for the growth to happen. So it's very important to listen to what they're saying and their challenges and what they want to do, and then being sharp in the response. And the other point that you mentioned is not only being attentive and listening, but also responses. And both were very linked. Considering that C-suite leaders have a lot of things on their mind, it's very important to be as brief as possible in the responses, as sharp as possible, so that you don't keep speaking. It's very important that everybody talks, decides, concludes, and move on, rather than keeping on talking about the same thing, because it will waste
Yeah.
everybody's time, and time is precious. I love that thing. And the third thing which you mentioned was the complexity of problems. And there are different sets of problems. And as finance leaders, we also think that we come across multiple problems, like a cash flow problem or an audit problem or a budget problem, right? There are these kind of problems that everybody does not align or might not understand it really in a straightforward way, right? So it's very important to represent those complex problems in a way that it's understandable with everybody. And what you also very importantly underscored was a solution, to come up with a
Solution.
solution. Because just stating the problem statement and not coming with a solutioning just confuses them more. It creates, and I know I am a founder, although I mean we are at a particular level of growth, and I understand when there are certain level of concerns or worries, it stresses a particular person. It says that's what we need to do, what we need to do, that there are हजार questions, that 100 questions that come. But when you have the solutions, when you come with a solution, it gives that channel or an outlet to come up that hey, this is the problem and these are the possible solutions. Let's work for the solutioning. So love that as well. And the other aspect of updation, and I believe that's very important for the C-suite leaders, because if you're able to give a proper updates, they don't come back to you with questions. They are not like what is happening at any point of time. They have a concern, they can just go to a mail, they can go to a deck, they can go to an Excel sheet, and they can just get the answer. Updation at multiple points of time really helps in terms of how they work. And business understanding, I completely agree, is very important, because we as human beings, we feel that we know everything, and when we come to the particular meetings and we act as if we know everything, that's not how it is. Because people, but as you rightly said, that you've worked across so many different industries, I think these are very on the ground and very important. These are not flashy advices that you gave. These were really very applicable advices which people can use in their working environment. And that's, I think, I loved your answer, how you work with the C-suite. You got us into very detailed approach to the playbook. So let's move to the next question. And you must be hearing this buzzword since a long point of time. AI has been like a buzzword since a long point of time. People started becoming realities also in multiple ways and means across the company's use case. But what is your opinion on AI disrupting the CFO tech
I
landscape?
think the opportunity for AI disruption in the finance space is also fairly. I think there are many areas where the disruption could happen. Now the question is how
Right.
soon or how quickly will that happen is a matter of, I think we will discover that as we go along. But I think there are some areas which I
Right.
clearly see are ripe for disruption and will happen sooner than later. Particularly, I think today certain areas like, let's say, financial reporting. I think financial reporting is considered a very specialized area where you need to understand how you need to understand accounting very well. You need to understand the technicalities of accounting very well. That's when you'll be able to present financial statements appropriately. And I think regulation also keeps changing. There are new accounting standards which come in every time. People have to factor that in and present financial statements. This is an area which is very ideal from an AI perspective because there is a lot of intelligence which is required to be applied, and intelligence which is not a very rule bound thing, right? It is not a binary thing saying that okay, if this is done, you go here. If it is not there, it's not there. It's more about understanding a particular standard or a recommendation and then applying that in the context of the financial statements, and that's where AI can add a significant
Right.
value. And I see this area definitely getting picked up sooner than later. I think companies will obviously do smaller pilots, test it out, and then slowly start rolling out. But I see that as an area, and this is an area which today a lot of high cost, highly trained people doing this activity in all kinds of companies, be it a listed company, unlisted, or whatever. And people take pride in doing this, and nothing wrong with it. I think they should, and they are well within their rights to do that. But I believe once this companies start realizing that this can be done with a good solid combination of an AI solution, this is up for disruption for sure. I think that's one area I see clearly an option. And then the related area is FP&A, which is the financial planning and analysis, which companies do. I think companies spend a lot of time today doing planning. Let's in all companies. I'm sure. Let's say if you're an April to March financial year following company, Come December, January, you start the planning process. You go through an elaborate exercise, get everybody's input, then put all the numbers together, then do a plan, and then you present it to the board, get it approved. And then 3 months down the line, then something will change in the market or the environment, and the whole plan becomes defunct. And then you have to again go back to the drawing board and redo the plan and things like that. Now, obviously, now companies have become smarter. They're also doing agile planning and doing more modular kind of plans so that they're able to quickly readjust to the business realities, or they also build scenario planning within the planning and the planning tools to support that.
Right.
But I believe with AI, this could be another area which can be significantly disrupted, because then the whole process can be very real time, iterative, as and when you want, and be it planning or even the financial planning analysis which companies do. See, today, if you look at finance teams, they provide a lot of reports, they churn out a number of reports, send out those reports on a monthly basis, or there are dashboards available. But even though in all of these, the reports are available, dashboard is available, still there has to be a finance team or a CFO along with his team, sit with the business, explain the numbers to the business teams, and that's when actions get taken. What I see as an opportunity is once these AI solutions are rolled out, you just have to go and click and say, okay, this is a dashboard. So what? Tell me, what does this mean? So it'll tell you those five things or two things which you want, and then say these are the areas you need to take action on.
Right.
So definitely another area. See, all these areas I'm picking because these are all today so specialized that many companies are not touching these areas for AI automation. They're still keeping it above. See, they're all going in the areas below. Let's say, like you speak about, right? Your invoice automation or AP invoice matching or processing or some collection forecasting or collection follow up. All of those areas are all anyway being looked upon. My view is, I think these higher areas within the finance hierarchy, if you were to call it that, is definitely waiting to get disrupted sooner than later. And what this means is, it's while yes, it will disrupt. It is not that it is going to take away all the jobs people are doing today. Just that I think it will allow them to look at what are the areas where the AI is applying those logics. Is it applying it correctly? Are there hallucinations happening there? Are there things which you need to fine tune, which will make the whole thing better? I think those are the opportunities which people doing these roles will have. However, I think it will also mean that all those people in performing these roles will also need to learn newer skills. They need to be able to appreciate technology and how these things work so that they're able to then use their functional knowledge and technology together to be able to add value.
Got it. I think I like that approach of yours in terms of the application, and I think couple of things stand out. One thing which you mentioned in with specific example is financial reporting and FP&A. I completely agree, and specifically for reporting, if you see, and one of the major challenges is the data content, right? And the data is huge. There is such a lot of transactional data, and for any one person, and you know how audits itself are so complex, right? An auditor comes and he has 100, 200, 300 questions. You answer them, he has 50 more 100 questions, then more questions come. It's like a never ending saga because there is such a lot of data points, right? And somebody starts evaluating it. So I think the reporting, how we can use the agentic framework to actually say that, hey, these are the data pockets, these are the data documents, these are the data banks that you're having, and how do you make sense of it? What are the kind of outcomes that you're expecting? What are the kind of insights that you're expecting? Putting the rule logic to actually understand, pick up the data, process the data, understand the data, and give it in a particular insight format. I think that is very important for the agents, AI agents to work on. And second is the FP&A. I agree, FP&A is complicated. Why? Because in my opinion, I feel that you look at the ERPs, they give you very basic data points. And if you want to do anything else, your business, you mentioned about business understanding, it varies across companies. How you are billing your customers varies from customer to company. Even within customers, there are so many level of billing formats that you do. So how do you recognize the revenues, and how do you forecast your cash flows? There are vendors, there are customers, there is salaries, there are taxes, so many elements of it. So I agree, these are two elements, and as you rightly said, there are multiple other elements that we have also worked on. We spoke about it, the entire invoice automation, collection side, or communications. I agree. There's a lot of things that AI agent could do, but you rightly said how soon or how quickly
Yeah.
is the question mark that comes up. Great, Venky. So I think let's move to the last question, and would love to know a couple of pieces of advice that you have for finance professionals to become a
Yeah.
finance leader.
I think I was touching upon it briefly when we were speaking about the earlier question you had. I think for finance professionals to be curious and to be curious about technology, I think is a very important element which everyone needs to have, because Sometimes you look at technology as, let's say, an ERP or some analytics tool which you have. While that could be true, but I think more and more technology, understanding technology and how that is having a overlap into what work you're doing or work you're likely to do is super critical. So therefore, being curious and having the interest to learn is very important, because I see more and more finance teams composition also changing. I think many companies are already doing it today. I think they always have some kind of analyst sitting within the team. It could be a combination of somebody with engineering background or with engineering plus analytical background, who is working along with the finance team to help them present information better, do their analytics stuff better, or help them build some dashboards, or do some quick queries and put
Right.
that together instead of waiting for an IT team to do it for them. So many finance teams are already embedding technology folks within their teams. But I see a bigger opportunity for someone with finance background with interest in technology being able to add a lot more value, because a, you understand the domain, the function, and then if you're able to get the technology element together, there's a lot more value you can add. And newer roles are going to emerge. I think there are already FinOps roles which are emerging in the cloud, in the infra space, right? I think there are such roles which are becoming very mainstream now. Every company is talking about FinOps role given the amount of money they spend on clouds. So I think there will be more and more such roles happening. So to my mind, one important element of finance professionals should be very open to is learning technology and learning to see how it applies in their context. And it could apply across. It need not be only in a FP&A role. It can apply in a invoicing or a revenue recognition role, or it could be in an AP role, or it could be a payroll role, or in any role, any function, finance function role. The opportunities for technology exist, and unless people are open to it, they're only going to limit their ability to take on larger roles. And
Got it.
I think, as finance professionals, one thing which I also see, which I think I tell people is, we have to see until the advanced level of automation comes and hits the entire finance function, which is going to take a little more time to hit all companies of shapes and sizes. You still have to do the routine and the quote unquote boring things properly regularly. So if you don't do those routine
Right.
boring things properly, it is going to have downstream impact for all of us. So in every function, in every role, there will be a bunch of things which are routine, recurring, has to be done, particularly in the finance area. And then there will be a bunch of things which
Right.
is interesting, more jazzy, more the fluff and the top, as you would call it, would be that. But I think unless the basic things are done well, you're not be able to do all those nice and fancy stuff. So I think you need to have the discipline to be able to do them and do that well. Like all these our Indian cricketers and all say, no, you should follow the process, and once you follow the process, the outcomes will happen. So in a way, this is like that. You have to do those basic things right. Those building blocks have to be in place for you to be able to be successful. And then, of course, this is one thing I keep telling. I think you have to be able to delegate a lot of the work which you do, delegate it with responsibility.
Right.
But if you don't delegate, you're not going to get take on larger roles. So there are a lot of people I see
Right.
are very hesitant to delegate what they're doing, because they think that if they delegate, the other person will not do it properly and there'll be some issue. There will be issues when you delegate. There will be issues, but that's the whole fun, right? You delegate and ensure that the other person is successful. That's what you will give you bandwidth to take on larger roles and bigger things. So I think that's another important element for young people. I say, be keep delegating, and that's what will give you opportunities. And of course, have another most important thing: have a passion outside of work. For young people, I think nowadays people
Understood.
are also happy doing all these social media stuff and spending time doing that late into the night and then sleeping over the weekends, versus having some passion or interest outside of work, which is healthy. It could be running, it could be playing some sport. Because as much as we should do our work intensely and with a lot of focus, unless you have something outside of work to look forward to, it's not going to keep you healthy and energetic. So I think that's another important thing which I would recommend.
Thanks, Venky. Thanks for sharing your pieces of advice for finance professionals. It comes from working at multiple shapes and sizes and growing shapes and sizes of companies across functions, working across teams. So it comes with a lot of heartfelt advice for young finance professionals. So thanks for sharing your pieces of advice. So everybody, thanks for joining in for the podcast. We got towards the end of the podcast. It was great to have Venky with us, sharing his experience, and 30-40 minutes, whatever we shared, is very short for us. But thanks, Venky. It was great to have you with us, sharing
Thank you,
your
Mata.
journey.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
It
you.
was wonderful talking to you.
Goodbye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.